Hello and welcome to SIY-Sew It Yourself. I'm Stephanie Soebbing from Quilt Addicts Anonymous, and I'm going to be your host for today's video tutorial on how to make the Sew Simple skirt. We're working with some really gorgeous fabric today. It's called Magic Friends by Charro for FreeSpirit Fabrics. It is really a fun pattern. It is a skirt that's sized for little girls, and you just need 2 fat quarters, some elastic, a safety pin to draw it through, some coordinating thread, and other basic sewing supplies that you probably already have if you are a sewer or a quilter. So this is going to be a really fun, really fast pattern, and although it's sized for little kids with short legs, you absolutely could alter the measurements and just follow the same steps to make one for you as well. Again, the pattern is called the Sew Simple Skirt, and it's available at SIY-SewItYourself.com. Let's get started with today's tutorial. It's super fun, super easy. You can absolutely make up a bunch of these, and I personally love using quilting cotton for little girls' dresses and skirts. The prints are always so fun and fabulous, so they can really have something custom and unique to them that looks super adorable, and it's not so big of a deal to have to do a little bit of ironing when it comes out of the wash if it gets a little wrinkled, and even if it does, you know, they're little kids, it's okay to be a little wrinkled. All right, well, let's get started with the tutorial. So you are going to use a yardstick or a rotary cutter and ruler if that's what you have on hand to cut this. I'm going to talk through my cutting process for cutting it using my typical quilting tools of my cutting mat, my 6x24 inch ruler, and my rotary cutter. So the first thing I did was layer my 2 fat quarters on top of each other, and I made sure that part of the fat quarter was hanging over that 0-inch mark on the mat, and then also past the 17-inch mark, which will give me enough fabric to cut this. Then I used the mat to measure. I laid my ruler down at 8.5 inches at both the top and the bottom of the mat that I was using, and then I'm able to cut a nice straight line 8.5 inches from top to bottom. Now, without moving any of the fabric, I did the same thing at 17 inches because 8.5 plus 8.5 equals 17, so that's going to give you 2 8.5-inch pieces. Now you can get rid of any excess that you have beyond that, and then without moving the fabric, we're going to turn the mat and cut down that 0-inch mark. So now we have 2 8.5-inch strips of fabric. Now we need to get them cut down to 20.5 inches in that width for the skirt. So what I did this one at a time. What you're going to do is you're going to lay it out with the selvage going beyond that 0-inch mark, and then also making sure that the edge of your fabric is going beyond 20.5 inches. And then you want to make sure that that really long edge is lined up against any inch line on your mat so you get a nice square cut. Then you take your ruler, and just like we did before, we're going to line it up at 20.5 inches on both the top and the bottom of the mat. That way we're able to get a nice square cut. Then flip it around and cut on the 0-inch mark, and then you've got 2 pieces that are 8.5 by 20.5 really quickly, and you're going to need 2 of those from each fabric in order to make our skirt. Now this skirt is not lined. You certainly could add a lining if you want. You'll just do the exact same steps as we're doing here, and just with a lining fabric, and that will work as well. But we're going to keep it super simple, as the name of the skirt implies, and get sewing on this. Now, I consulted with my daughter and actually let her pick from this fabric collection, which is shipping to stores now that stock FreeSpirit fabrics, and I let her pick her favorites from the line. But I gave her the advice that I thought we should put the darker fabric on the bottom because it looks heavier, and so it will make a more pleasing skirt to have it come down. Now, you want to have matching thread, or at least close enough thread, when you're doing a project like this, because unlike with quilting where all of your thread is kind of concealed on the inside of the quilt, you are going to see your thread in a project like this. So we've got some options. I went ahead and pulled out 2. I've got a yellow and a teal. The teal is close enough, and it looks really good with this, but I'm really going to see a lot of the thread up here when I'm doing the stitch to have our elastic waistband. So I think I'm going to go with the yellow because this would really stand out up here, whereas down here there's enough yellow in it to where as long as I can get a nice neat stitch for my hemline, it's going to just add to it and be a nice little accent like these pretty yellow flowers, and it just doesn't stand out as much against this fabric as the teal does against my yellow. Now you could totally switch it up and I could use yellow for my top waistband stitching and I could use teal for my bottom hem, but we're going to keep it as simple as possible and we're just going to use yellow on the whole thing. One note about thread: when you go to the store, you're going to see so many types of thread if you're not shopping at a quilt shop. Hopefully you're shopping at a quilt shop and getting this from here, and they're going to have stuff that's going to work both for garments and for quilting. But if you end up at like a big box store, make sure that you are choosing thread that is for the application that you are using, because there's all kinds. There's stuff that's just meant for embroidery and isn't actually strong enough to hold your fabric together. There's stuff that's meant for hand quilting only and kind of has a waxy covering on it so that it slides better. So just make sure that you know what it is that you're getting and what its application is, so that you're not just going by the color that works, but also the purpose that that thread was created for, so that way you don't have problems later on with your garment. All right, so I've got my skirt top and my skirt bottom. What we're going to do is we're going to sew it together along this edge. If you're coming to this tutorial from the quilting world, that's going to be super easy. It's going to be a normal thing for you to do. One thing that you want to pay attention to is if there is any kind of direction to your fabric. You want them both to be pointing up. So I'm taking a look at this and I can actually see that there are a lot of twigs that are going this way. And obviously plants like to reach toward the sun. So I have this upside down right now. So I'm going to flip that around so that all my twigs are pointing up. So that way they're going to be going up toward that skirt top. This one doesn't matter, can go either way, but definitely make sure that you take a peek at that before you get going, and that both the skirt front and the skirt back are both facing in the up direction if there's directionality. All right, now that we've got that, I'm just going to flip these guys right sides together. Now, honestly, I probably wouldn't pin this because I just cut it. I know it's the same size, but I'm going to show you guys how to pin since this is meant for newbies, and that way you guys can feel really confident in what you guys are doing. So I'm just going to take and match my corners on the edges and put some pins in there. And everything should be the same size. If it's off by a little bit, it probably means you just had a slight variation in the way that you cut. But if it's off significantly, stop and figure out what's going on, because you don't want to have it be the wrong size now, because it's not going to get better. So figure out what's up and address that and then move forward. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and give a pin in the middle, and if you want, you can just stop here, or you can also do it at about the quarters, and that will be plenty to hold everything together as you're sewing it and keep it from getting kind of ruffled. We're going to do this both sides for our skirt front and our skirt back. Now we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm just going to start by lining everything up so that the edge of my fabric is even with the edge of my presser foot, and I have my sewing machine set to sew a 1/4 inch stitch. You can also get a 1/4 inch foot if that is not an option for your machine. And we're just going to sew down the entire length of this. When you get to the end, you can actually chain piece to get the second part of your skirt in there, the skirt back. Now I'm working on a fairly basic beginner sewing machine here. It doesn't have a lot of stitches, but it does have some really key ones that are come in handy, and you should be able to find them on any sewing machine. And that's going to be a zigzag stitch or an overlocking stitch. If you take a look, you're going to see a couple of different options of zigzag here. And then this is an overlocking stitch, as is this one and this one. You can consult your sewing machine manual to see which zigzag or overlocking stitch is going to be best for this application. I'm going to choose an overlocking stitch, and what it's going to do is it's going to seal over those edges so that they don't fray when it's being worn or washed. It's kind of like a serger. It's not as good, but it will do the job for a homemade garment. So now you can see that that needle is going back and forth and then over the edge of the fabric. You don't want it to go into the fabric, you want it to go over, because when it goes over, it connects with that bobbin thread below and kind of helps seal off that edge. So I'm going kind of slow now. You can speed it up once you get the hang of it, but just make sure when you get started that you're paying attention to where everything is, so that way you have the fabric positioned in a way to where that thread is going to go over the side. I did my second panel with a zigzag stitch. You guys can see the difference. This is the overlocking with that 1/4 inch stitch first, and then we just have the plain zigzag. Either way, make sure you do that 1/4 inch stitch first. That's when I'm going to give you your accuracy, make sure everything holds together. And then this one is going to keep your edges nice and secure. You can actually kind of see that this one did a little bit better job of securing the edges without having all these little thread frays. There's quite a bit of them if you zoom out some more. Both of them though will do the job for this project without needing to get an overlocker, and you should have both stitch functions on even the most basic sewing machine. So just consult your manual, see which one is going to be best for you. All right, so now we're going to press our seam so that it is underneath the bottom fabric, which for me is this darker fabric. You may have heard the term setting the seam. I don't always do it for quilting, but it's important with garment sewing. It helps that thread kind of become one with the fabric, and it makes everything lie a lot nicer. So all you do to do that is just go over it with the iron, and then that's good to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold up this and just kind of open it up. And this is something I see quilters make a lot of mistakes on when they're new. But when you're pressing it over like this, what you're going to do is you're going to have your iron completely on the side that we're pressing away from, and then you're going to let it drag up and over on that seam. And that'll make sure that you don't have any pleats or buckles in it, and that you haven't accidentally pressed too much fabric into the fold so that it doesn't lay nice. So that is really helpful when you're doing that. I'm going to go ahead and give it a spritz with my spray mister, and then that will help it stay nice and flat. You're going to do the same thing on the other half of your skirt. So the next step in the pattern is to place these guys right sides together and sew our side seams and press them open. But I find it a lot easier to overlock the edges of the seams before they are sewn together when they need to be pressed open. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to overlock the edges using that overlocking stitch on both sides. Again, zigzag will work just fine too. And then I'm going to pick back up with the directions and go ahead and pin these together and get my side seams sewn. It just works easier for me that way, but you can feel free to experiment and do it after if that works for you. Overlocking ahead of time has caused just a tad bit of a curl. So I'm going to go ahead and just give that a press, and that'll set that seam and then also help it lie nice and flat. So now we're going to take and place our right sides together, making sure to match where our skirt top and our skirt bottom are coming together. I'm going to line that up really well so that those are right on top of each other, and I'm going to put a pin right at that center. Then I'm going to pin at my top corners, and then again at each quarter. And I'm going to do everything again on the other side. Now I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam down both sides of my skirt sides. Now for this seam, since I've already overlocked everything, I'm going to go ahead and reinforce those stitches by sewing back and forth at the beginning and end of the seam. That way they don't come out as we're working on our hem and our waistband. Try to leave this pin in as long as possible. That will help ensure that your fabrics meet right at the sides of that skirt and that they look fabulous. All right, we're going to reinforce those stitches again. Now this next part would be easier to do on an actual ironing board, but I've got my pressing mat, so that's what we're going to use. We're just going to press those seams open. I just put my fingers ahead of the iron and spread that open. It kind of finger presses it a little bit. And whenever I'm pressing like this and I really need it to stay put, I'd like to use a little bit of spray mist on it too, and then hit it again. And repeat everything you just did on the other side. All right, now we're going to fold up for our hem. You could use a seam gauge for this, a tape measure, or your handy quilting ruler, whatever works. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to fold up a 1/4 inch. So since I'm using my quilting ruler here, I can just fold that up over a 1/4 inch until it reaches where that 1/4 inch mark is. And then you can kind of just eyeball it from there. So once you have it folded up, and you're going to be folding to the wrong side, you want to be able to see the right side right there, just that little bit, that 1/4 inch bit. And what I like to do is kind of move down a little bit and measure out that I'm still at a 1/4 inch, which I am. And then I'll press there. And then I kind of go in between and get that. And depending on, how much you've done this, you can eyeball a little bit, but it's always good to double check yourself as you make your way around the skirt, which is what I'm going to do next. All right, now that I've made it all the way around, we're going to turn it up again, this time for 1 inch, and that is going to hide all those raw edges on the inside, so that way we can have a nice concealed edge without having to worry about overlocking anything. So just like before, I'm going to measure that out to start. Then just keep checking that it's even as you make your way around. Now before you sew all the way around here to secure this hem, you can throw a couple of pins in just to secure it and make sure that it doesn't shift around on you as you're going. I usually start at my edges where my side seams are, and then go to the middle, and then maybe do it a 1/4 of the way down again. You don't need a ton. You just want it to make sure that it's not, dragging any one way, and then all of a sudden you have a bunchy part where you don't want it. Now you're going to set your sewing machine up to sew an 1/8 of an inch stitch, and you're going to go all the way around the edge of your hem, and you're going to line the edge of your presser foot up with this fold that we created with the hem, so that way it will go right in the middle of this 1/4 inch that we pressed under, secure everything in one go, and you'll be good to go. One thing that can be helpful when you're sewing circular objects like this is you can take your compartment off of your sewing machine, and that way you're able to just feed the entire skirt over it, and it will feed nicely both underneath and above. All right, so I've set this up to that 1/8 of an inch stitch, and I have the edge of my presser foot lined up with the fold. I'm going to remove that pin to start, and you just want to take your time with this. Because I'm using that yellow thread, this is something that might be a little visible. So I just want to go nice and slow so that I've got nice even stitching that's all at the same level, and my hemline looks fabulous. All right, that is looking really good, very neat and tidy. We're going to repeat that exact same process with our skirt top to get it ready for our waistband. There is one really big difference, and that is you need to make sure you leave a 2-inch opening for turning. So when I get started, I like to sew a little forward and a little back. That way we're not going to rip those stitches open when we put the elastic in, and I always start in the back. That way if there's anything funny that goes on when you overlap your stitches later, it's going to be hidden. All right, I made my way around. I've got my 2-inch opening. I'm going to go ahead and backstitch here and break my thread so I can get my elastic inside. All right, so you're going to take your elastic and you're going to measure your child's waist and cut your elastic to 1 inch larger than your child's waist. We're going to end up overlapping it by 1 inch at the end, and so then it'll be just a little bit snug. It'll be perfect. So we're going to take just a regular safety pin and we're going to go ahead and put that in the end of our elastic. That's going to allow us to feel it as we feed it through the elastic casing here. So I'm just going to go ahead and slip the elastic into the casing, and I can feel that safety pin right here. And I'm going to go ahead, it's a little challenging to get it into start, but once it is straight in there, it's fine. It goes through pretty easy. You can kind of just grab that safety pin and push it forward and then pull, and it'll keep on going. Now, when you get to the point where this end is not hanging out so much more, or even now, so that you don't forget about it, you can take and we can pin this to our skirt so it does not get caught up inside the elastic later. We don't want that, because then it will go away and we'll have to fish it out. So we're just going to keep making our way around. It can get a little hairy when you are going around those seams, but otherwise it's just push and pull. All right, I've got my safety pin all the way around, so we're going to go ahead and pull that all the way out. And I'm going to unpin my elastic here, and I'm going to overlap those and remove this safety pin. And we're going to overlap by about 1 inch. You don't have to get out and measure it. Eyeballing it is fine. And I'm going to pin straight through those. Now, before I sew this together, I'm just going to feel around the edges to make sure that I have not twisted the elastic. That does not feel nice against the waist. Everything is feeling great. So I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to zigzag stitch this shut. I go over it quite a few times because I don't want that to pop out. It's not a hard repair, but it's not one you want to have to make if you can avoid it by just stitching a few times to start with. So I'm going to leave that pin in place until I've gotten my first couple of zigzags in. I feel like it's just easier that way to keep it all nice and aligned. And since we're overlapping by a whole inch, I actually can really just avoid the pin altogether and stitch all the way down. But I'm about halfway now. I think it's pretty easy to pull the pin out, keep everything together and nice. So we're just going to stitch down. All right, I've gone over one time, but like I said, we're going to do this a few times. So I'm going to back it up now and go forward and back, and we'll go forward one more time just for good measure. So you can see what that zigzag stitch looks like. It's pretty thick on there, so it should stay in place pretty well. And now what you can do is you can just feed that through and kind of pull it to get it nice and flat, because what we want to do is close this up. So we need this to be fed all the way through. All right, you can see it's bunched a little bit. That's fine. What we're going to do is we're just going to stitch over. We're going to start a little bit before we started, or before we ended, and go a little bit past. And you may have to pull on this a tad bit in order to get it to stay flat under your machine. Just make sure you're sewing that 1/8 of an inch stitch and that you are not stitching over your elastic, or it will not move and there will be problems. So make sure you avoid that. All right, so I'm starting about a 1/2 inch before I ended. I'm going to reinforce those stitches. And I'm going to take my time. I'm going to go nice and slow. And now I'm going to pull from both ends, because that should help keep the tension nice for this. And just continue sewing that 1/8 of an inch stitch, trying not to stitch through my elastic. Now I've come to the start of my stitching line. I'm going to go about a 1/2 inch past it and reinforce again. And that should do it. This is why I always do this section on the back, because if you look closely, my stitching did not overlap perfectly, but it'll be fine because there's a lot of gathers going on here, and when it's in the back, you'll never notice. So now all you have to do is even out those gathers. You can kind of smooth it around. It'll go pretty easy from here. Then we're going to flip it right side out, and it is ready for a press and a wear. Oh, that turned out cute. Look at that. That is so fun. My daughter's gonna love this. It's so adorable. Yellow is one of her favorite colors right now, and it is super, super cute. Might be a little short on the older one, but it will still be absolutely adorable and amazing, and it's super customizable. So if you wanted to make this longer or shorter, you just have to play with that length. So we've lost 1.5 inches from our seam here and our hem, both at the top and the waistband. So we started at 8.5 inches. So each of these are 7. We have a 14-inch skirt. So if you wanted something to be longer than this, then you would just need to figure out whatever that is and take your 2 pieces and divide that by 2. So like say we wanted a 20-inch finished skirt. Then we're going to take that, divide it by 2. We have 10. We're going to add 1.5 inches for our hem and our seam. And we know that we need to start with 11.5 inch for the bottom and the top, and you will end up with a 20-inch skirt. So this one's super convenient because it can be made with fat quarters. I'm sure we all have a little bit of that in our stash, but also be sure to visit your Jaftex retailer because they're the ones who made this tutorial and free pattern possible for you. Again, the pattern is called the Sew Simple Skirt, and it's available at SIY-Sew-It-Yourself.com. You can get this fabric from an SIY retailer. It is shipping out right now to stores. It's called Magic Friends by Charro for FreeSpirit fabric. So make sure to check that out. I made a lot of clothes for my little girls out of FreeSpirit. It just bodes very well for it, and this is a great collection to do it with. In addition to FreeSpirit, the Jaftex family of fabrics also includes Henry Glass, Studio E, and Blink. You're sure to find something that meets your taste and your kids' taste for this project. Also, make sure to check out SIY-Sew-It-Yourself.com to find a SIY retailer near you, or online if you don't have one near you. And also, they have lots of other free projects that you can try and build your sewing skill set. Thanks again for following along, and until next time, happy quilting.